Thank you for joining us for this week's Community Conversations. I'm very excited to share our guest today is Ruth Diaz. She's a social scientist, organizational consultant, and innovator on conflict resiliency and community development. She is also the co-founder of Liminal XR, an extended reality company amplifying diverse contributors to create transformative and inclusive experience and events in XR. Ruth is also an environmental storyteller, has built hundreds of immersive experiences and events, and is passionate about all technology mediums that help us become better versions of ourselves as humans individually and collectively. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk to Ruth about managing fear and biases in community. So for those who might not know what fear and bias are, could you give us a little overview?
Yeah. And I think maybe to explain that, I'll talk a little bit more about my background and what makes me want to lean in and talk about this. So I have a background in clinical psychology, and I've been working with people feeling lots of fear for a long time. Communities are a different kind of expression of fear. I think in some ways, if we imagine evolutionary psychology, we felt afraid, and so we grouped together and we stay together. So from a fear-based place, communities are a social exchange of safety, but fear still creeps in. And so I've been building communities and troubleshooting communities for years now. And a lot of that has to do with the framework that I teach and developed on conflict resiliency. So a lot of times when people hear conflict resiliency, they say, what about conflict resolution? Which is, there's this expectation, because most of us have heard about conflict resolution, that that's really what I'm talking about. It is and it isn't. And so what I believe is that fear is just information. It's information that things have changed. And when I feel fear as an individual or as a community, I'm going to take my kind of peripheral vision. If you imagine I'm this prairie dog on the savannah and I'm just looking around and eating my bugs or whatever, and fear, some change in my environment is going to make me get alert, and I'm going to scan with the intention of narrowing, of actually like creating this tunnel. I'm looking for the problem. I'm looking for the threat. And so bias is kind of a habit of threat. If we only get eaten by eagles in this area, I'm going to be biased to be looking upwards for the threat. And so we do that in communities too. And especially when you have communities that are mostly online and typing, the place inside of our brains that is stimulated by written is different than what's stimulated by auditory. You know, they overlap, but they're different. And so that can actually like kind of help us narrow in, but create a whole drama and play, a Shakespearean play in our minds of how those words are being said by somebody else that might not be true about how they were feeling. And so a lot of bias and fear can creep in very quickly the more you take away all those nonverbals that are up to 80% of how we communicate.
So, for example, I want to think, I wonder if I'm understanding this correctly. So if I were in an online community and, for example, I saw someone come in with, say, anti-LGBTQIA labels or badges next to their name,
yeah,
that would definitely cause me fear. And I would definitely be biased to think this person wants to hurt my LGBTQIA family members and friends.
Yes.
Is that an example of that?
That can be. And so your bias is anticipating conflict. Your bias is saying this person, thank you, Jeffrey, this person is my enemy. It's a threat. It's the eagle in the sky. And so now maybe I have to go on the offense to defend. And they may be advertising their bias of saying, I don't want to talk about these things, or I am specifically anti this. And And in their mind, they might see that as like, I'm being honest about my preferences. And so now we have a conflict of values and a conflict of what preferences means versus bigotry. So it's a tough match, but maybe we're both there because we have something else in common. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. I think that's really interesting, that the idea that someone might see it as them being honest about their preferences. Yeah. Because my fear and my bias is they're making it very clear who they came to F with.
Maybe, or maybe they're also just saying, this is my boundary. I don't want to go here. And you know, there's the often touted freedom of speech concept of, I'm going to represent the devil's advocate. I'm going to be this other side. So to make it concrete and not make it about the other people out there and the eagles and the prairie dogs, I'm going to give you an example of this happening a couple days ago. I was in a virtual space. So what I love about extended reality is you get to see a lot of the patterns that are happening in online communities in virtual spaces. They just are like exaggerated and amplified, and they go quicker because you don't have to type a lot of times. So you get to just like watch these chemical misunderstandings happen super quick. So I'm sitting at a table and somebody comes in with a username, and I'm with a group of people that I don't know. I've just met, and we're having a conversation all around the world. Very interesting, kind of engaging moment. This person comes in and they have a username, and to be respectful of not bringing in specifics, I'm gonna make this a little more vague than it was. But username started with the color white. It was white. And then the second part was a weapon. I'm not going to tell you which weapon, but it was a weapon, white weapon. And they had the physical avatar of a white male, and they were taking up space, if you'll forgive this, like a very unconscious white male, often gamer kind of bro of sorts. And so they came in and sat at this table, and we're taking up all this space. And I'm looking at this and going, I have fear, and I have a bias towards this, and I feel offended, and I feel offensive. And how am I going to address this, considering that I'm gathering the rest of the table does not seem to be awkwardly shifting in their seats. However, most of the rest of the table was engaged through their laptops, which means their bodies wouldn't be shifting uncomfortably. And so that's a piece that I'm tracking because I've been trained to track that. But most people might be like, wow, this whole table is in agreement that this is okay because nobody's showing discomfort. So there's your situation. Yeah.
Wow. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask Ruth?
I just give you a setup, and you may never know what happened next unless you ask questions about it.
It's true. Does anybody have a question for Ruth before I ask a question? Okay. So we see this as community managers. We see this in the form of trolls.
Yeah.
In our online forum.
Yes.
In our online forums. And you were talking about conflict resiliency versus conflict resolution.
Yes.
And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about conflict resiliency, because what I think it sounds like, but I don't want to bring my bias into what I think it sounds like, and how we can use conflict resiliency within the context of our community members who may be in violation of our terms and conditions and our policies, and who may be doing things that we feel are not appropriate for our communities.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm very passionate about conflict resiliency. Conflict resiliency is holding, I would almost like say, a bridge between offensive or trolling and passive avoidance of all conflict ever, right? If we were all genuinely avoiding all conflict ever, we would never interact with each other. We would just like, you know, there's risk. There's always risk of conflict. So what I believe is happening when we say the word conflict is what we're saying is I'm afraid and I'm overwhelmed. And I'm identifying that something's happening here where I don't feel like I'm in control or I'm going to be successful. And so by adding conflict resolution, I know where I want to get to, but I'm also not present with where I'm at. And conflict resiliency says, what if it's not about arriving anywhere? What if it's about turning that dissonance, that discord, that discomfort, what it's about turning that into a dance, another D word. How do we make a dance out of our conflict? And the way I believe we can do that is step the conflict back. So by saying somebody is trolling, like I could have thought in my mind that human who sounds like male identifying, white identifying, chose that username here to troll this space and to you know, like mimic or play act a borderline white supremacist here. I could have framed that. I didn't think, to be honest, that this person was a troll. I just thought this is a very ignorant, unconscious, privileged human, but I don't know how deep this goes. Okay, so I see a question here. How do you differentiate between interacting with your community's trolls to correct misinformation about your platform and giving trolling too much attention or trying to ignore it? So amazing question, Nicole. Thank you. So I want to go to the end of your question first. Giving trolling too much attention. So we've got to walk that back. If we think about where in our life we've seen trolling behavior in its original, smallest bodied form, it's probably easy to see that trolling is a complex expression of being about 2 or 3 years old. The terrible twos, they have that label for a reason, right? So that sense of like, wait, I have power and I can destroy things and I can cause you pain. So trolling is a type of tantrum. And the statement, don't give it attention, there's usefulness in that of like fueling it with attention can create more discord and conflict. It's like a reward. However, the truth is, a lot of times what we're learning with children and bad behavior and however we want to label that is there's a problem with the structure for those children. And they're learning how to be empowered and dislike things and stay in their bodies. And so tantrums are actually a really healthy part of that age. If children are not able to like really flip out when their bodies are that tiny, later on, they can actually have like depression and anxiety cycles and have very little control of that anger response. And so when we talk about giving trolls attention, we're kind of working off an old paradigm that hasn't proven to be true. We all have that place inside of us where we're hurting and we want to understand something differently. And so what I'm inviting us all to do here is think about trolls as somebody taking a risk to put out information they haven't thought completely through. And they might have an alternative agenda than what the goals of the community are. But really the thing we all have in common is they want to connect and they don't know how to do that. And maybe they've gotten very twisted in how they express and feel connection. So for me, my reframe from I don't want to give them too much attention is looking for the patterns of what kinds of attention they need and then giving that attention to everybody.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you. That's really interesting. I think that from my perspective, and then Jeffrey has a really good question, and I don't want to take away from that. I think, you know, where I would move forward in terms of addressing it as an issue would be when they start causing harm. But every, whether it's visible, it's clearly visible or not.
Yeah.
I think I would love to hear what other people think about that.
And harm is
another thing.
That's a subjective piece a lot of times. And so, yeah, there can be a cycle of recalling our values. So we're going to take it out of extended reality and go back to about a year ago. There's a conflict in a community online that I was helping manage. And what I did with that moment, because I felt so hurt and sad that these people were being so attacking of each other, is I did something a little radical, which is I did an apology for how I have let the community down on this value that I thought we were all missing. I was like, hey, we have this value of assuming positive intent and being respectful. And I'm realizing we haven't done anything around this value for a long time. And so I want to apologize because I feel like there's a conflict going on that maybe if we had really practiced this more, we would be more ready for this. And then I tagged these community members with my apology. And then they actually, in turn, apologized to each other and cleaned it up.
That's fantastic. So Jeffrey had a question. His question is, how do you approach mitigating fear and bias in community members who've been unfairly categorized as lurkers when they're more likely just taking the time to figure out how they're most comfortable engaging? This is a wonderful question. And the whole lurker question is a big one. People are very opinionated on this.
So conflict resiliency for me, this model that I teach on conflict resiliency, it's called deepen, orient, transform. That's the keys. Deepen into the uncomfortable, orient to the opportunity, transform the relationship. And so lurkers is another word for bystanders. And community managers are put into the opposite archetype of the fixer or the hero. And so those are polarities within conflict. And so the most triggering thing for a community manager is bystanders. Why aren't you saying anything? What have I done wrong? I just want to kick you all out because you're just crickets. It's silence. Like, why aren't you like taking everything I'm offering you and engaging? And so it hurts. It hurts. I feel that pain with you. Also, I'm going to steal this from someone I saw online saying this the other day. I thought it was a brilliant reframe for lurkers. Learners.
That's what Richard Millington says.
How do we flip this into learners? That learners have different types of responding. And it may be a temporary state for a very engaging, outgoing person who's just maybe had a community trauma and is trying to figure out how to belong differently. It could be somebody who is just going to randomly, kind of like a butterfly, land on this community 20 times in the next year without saying anything. And then when this conflict comes up, they're going to say, wait, I remember why I land on this community. I'm going to say something to remind us all why I keep coming back. So learners are just like, they're just in their chrysalis. They're just incubating. And there's going to be a large degree of people in any community that are just witnessing and learning how to practice being comfortable with that and believing that those people are seeing us in our best light. That they, as community managers, that they're watching how we're doing it well, and they're going to go off and do a different community and do it even better. And they're going to refer to all the things we're teaching them. That's how I work with it.
Same. I'm very much of the leave them be. Leave them be. There's no need to do any urging or intriguing.
There's different ways to engage people with content. So video content, emoji activations. Like I've noticed on Discord, and maybe this is on all platforms now, you can create your own emojis for the platform. And so I wonder, I haven't seen this yet, but I think it would be cool to put a list together of the people who are the least engaged. If there's a way to track this, who are the least engaged, but do log on, do look at the page or whatever, and actually outreaching them and saying, we're going to make some new emojis. Do you have any favorite symbols, or like, what's your favorite emoji to use if you ever use it? And that's giving them this little bite-sized way to like try to engage and see what they have to say.
That's wonderful. Does anyone have another question for Ruth? Okay. I think that's a lovely idea. I'm very much in the leave them be. There's no need. Oh,
actually, I have one more thing on this. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think Jeffrey's question is really important in the respect of, it's not just about how I'm engaging with the lurkers. It's about how people are perceiving the lurking, right? So especially if we imagine back to the table with the white weapon username person, right? I could have perceived everyone at that table as being lurkers and actually amplifying what was happening with me and this person. I could have felt like if I didn't say anything, I was going to be a lurker, and I was in agreement with their username. I'm curious if AMAs are allowed to ask questions the other direction. What would each of you have done if this had happened and you'd been at a virtual table or a physical reality table and somebody had a username of white weapon?
Are we community managers in this scenario?
That's a great question. And see if your answer is different from both directions, right? So as just a participant at that table.
Would anyone like to answer besides me?
Yeah.
I can put you guys on mic, or you can.
I'd love to hear responses, because I want to learn from this.
Yes.
It's a tough situation.
Nicole or Jeffrey or anyone else who's online, would you like to respond to that?
What would you have done if you had seen this person sit down with that username in a social space? White weapon. Everyone's thinking about it. It's a tough one. I definitely sat there for about 2 or 3 minutes and just going, oh, like, I don't want to do this. But okay, so Jeffrey's like, CM, yes.
Well, you guys can both feel free to turn your microphones on if you want to talk, because I would love to hear, and I know Ruth would too. Like to hear your responses. So I feel free to turn your mics on, because I can't.
You want to, and you want to be more of a lurker, that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, they don't have presenter permissions. Okay.
Let me fix that. It's okay. Let me fix that. Presenter mode. There you go, Mr. J. Is it working? Nicole, I'm going to give you presenter. There he is.
Hey, Jeffrey.
Hey.
Just want to make sure I'm looking at the right, because I had you on my screen.
You got it. No worries.
No, I like I said, I'd be reluctant to ask as the community manager at that table, but if I was attending, I'd be like, hey, what's up with that?
Okay, so that's an interesting differentiation. Yeah. I'm curious how much you're aware, what you tell yourself about like why that's different. As a community manager, I wouldn't want to say anything. As an attendee, I would. Yeah.
I think it's just, as the community manager, we're automatically programmed to like respect people's right to express themselves as they, or present however they choose.
Yeah.
But then since as an attendee, you're more inclined to want to create conversation with that person in some way. So you can say, oh, you have a cool hat, or why does your username say white weapon?
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Great. No, thank you. There's also, I want to add to that, there's a risk as a community manager, if the room is aware that you are in that role, like it's on your label or whatever else, calling someone out to ask that question publicly is information for the group. and it can create more of an antagonistic response, a defensive response.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, the risk of not saying anything as a community manager is that I'm now normalizing.
That's true.
So it's a tough situation in that place of power.
Yeah.
To allow that to exist for as long as it might, versus like make the priority of like, am I engaged enough with this person to pull them aside before this moment is over and figure out what's going on? Yeah. Or do I need to address this right now because they might vanish and we need to set some important norms about how we take up space here? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm incognito as an attendee, curiosity can be really friendly and just be like, I'm just trying to understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for all of those. Anyone else? What would you do?
Well, as a community manager, I can look at their information as someone who's registered with the community, and I can kind of find out a little bit about them before I jump to any conclusions. And I would also just see if this person does anything. I would monitor their behavior. That said, whatever organization I'm working for has terms and conditions, has policies, and I would have to operate within those as well. So I would kind of be in wait and see, and I might, if that person's like, I would notice what conversations they're in, and if they do respond in an inappropriate way, that's when eyebrows get raised, and but I might do what Jeffrey suggested, which is, hey, like, nice hat, or what's up with the name?
Yeah,
very intriguing name. I might approach it from a very diplomatic place. Yeah. But like I said earlier, there are people who sometimes come armed and ready, and more than want to rumble, so to speak.
No pun intended with armed and ready with a weapon, right?
That because I heard weapon and I automatically went to that place. So
that's right. Yeah.
So okay. So anybody else want to
white
Nicole,
weapon?
Would you like to? Luca, would you like to weigh in on this?
Don't.
Let me make Luca presenter. Hang on. Presenter. Oh, he's the host. Oh, look. Oh, would you like to speak, Nicole? Would you like to speak, Nicole?
Well, I just joined. I'm sorry. I had an internet shut down for a year. So, well, thank you very much, Ruth, for your time and, sharing your knowledge with us. And obviously, I'm learning. I'm a really young guy building communities right now, building in CMX Connect. But yes, I don't have a direct question right now, but probably in the Microsoft Teams chat, I will have some.
Okay.
And yes, thank you very much. And apologies for joining later. I should be the first one here.
That's okay. No worries, Luca. Glad you're here. That's okay. No worries, Luca. Glad you're here. Got an echo.
Yeah, we got a little echo. I'm gonna. Okay. Ruth, pardon me, Nicole, if you would like to.
Luca, can you mute yourself?
Turn off your host. Luca, can you mute yourself? Turn off your host. I'm gonna make.
Sorry.
I think we're gonna echo because we have two hosts.
I just activated.
No, I would just.
Open for you?
No, I would just.
Mute yourself.
Mute yourself.
There you go.
Better.
That's not the echo.
Sometimes it happens because technology is wonderful, but it's not perfect. What happens sometimes is we do get this echo when there's two people hosting. So I'm trying to think if there are other ways we could use conflict resiliency as community managers.
Yeah. So I appreciate, I'm sad Nicole left. Sorry about that. If Nicole felt uncomfortable there or what happened, but feel protective. What?
I think she's still here.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to type a message to her. Nicole, would you like to speak?
She actually answered here in the chat, feel protective of my other community members. So that's exactly it. So Again, imagining this polarity, hero, bystander, right? I want to save the victims of this username, because whether or not this human intended to do harm in their username, there can still harm be happening. I feel like Yoda. Like there's a problem, right? There's a crossover between what sounds like a white male, that person has chosen a physical avatar of a white male, and now they have white weapon as their username. That's kind of a triple whammy, right? And so, yeah, I made the decision to engage and ask some questions and learn about what common ground we did have. And as I learned more about what we had in common, I estimated I could ask some questions about that username. And at first it went well, but then it did not go well. And it turned into a full-blown like conflict. This person started screaming at me that I was racist because I had seen something racist in their name, even though I had not used that word at all. And they said they were going to report me, and then they ran off. So that's conflict for you.
It definitely is. Okay.
And conflict resiliency for me was holding my ground and staying present with the emotions that I was bringing there. I was sad. So first identifying my discomfort. I was sad. I was scared. I had fear. I had guilt. Some of it was my own white passing guilt of just being like, oh, how can we take up so much space over and over and just like do these kind of ignorant things as white passing people? So I had guilt. And I also had curiosity. And I think about these kinds of moments like scratch and sniff stickers is like, and even emojis, like if you notice when there's a bias going on, if somebody says something vulnerable about their intersectional identity or whatever, and then somebody laughs at that, that's a scratch and sniff moment for me of being like, what just happened there? I'm just going to send you a little direct message and say, I'm curious about your laughter. What happened?
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Tell me what's going on. And so what I wish this human had done, because they did explain, they said, this is connected to a game I used to play. And I was like, there was an actual weapon called the white weapon in this game. And they said, yes. I was like, okay. This person wasn't getting a pass for me in this. Like, this wasn't just like, oh yeah, just keep using that username and behaving the way you do. But I was going to let it go as a, like, this was uncomfortable for them. And this, if I see them again, I'm probably going to bug them just ever so much about that name again. But I'm also going to go do more investigating. But I mean, ideally, if I had been that person and somebody had said that to me, I would have been like, God, I can't believe I did this. Thank you so much. How have I been surviving with this username for so long? I'm so glad you're checking me on this. I've got to change this. Times have changed. I shouldn't be wearing this. And I would thank that person. They did not have that response and were very, very triggered by this. And I think it was a moment where I realized this is me being an ally. It's very uncomfortable, but I can hold my ground and not escalate this. I didn't accuse them of anything. They made the connection. And I held there, and then they screamed and yelled and jumped on the table and then ran off. And that was the moment.
So interesting. So interesting. Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's so hard to take that step back because my bias goes immediately to,
well, and
that's a Spockian eyebrow raise right there. Like, you're kind of coming in here and you're giving me a signal about something.
Yeah.
And, I cannot, there's no way I can't interpret that as provocative.
Well, and what I'll tell you is I did investigate them later. I went to the app that we did have in common and I looked at the spaces they had created. Same username, different application, different community. And they have very little engagement with the spaces they've made. And what I realized was when I told this human being, like, I'm asking you questions about your username, I was actually feeling really compassionate and kind of a sense of pity for them, because I was realizing this person might be repelling a really interesting, vibrant community without even knowing it. And so I'm going to give them information on this. What I'm sad about is we actually had some things in common from what I could see in their environments. And I'm sad that that person is probably going to walk away from our conversation and say that they were bullied in virtual reality and that they were trolled. And you know, I can hear that it felt like that. And I'm sad that that's how that ended up. But I don't regret saying what I said, which was just, I'm just asking you questions about your username. That's all I did.
I think too, another thing talking about bias is tone. Like, I think we can read messages like in whatever community we're in and emails.
Yeah.
It can be very challenging to understand tone.
Yeah.
And we all do bring our respective biases to it.
That's
like
right.
Someone might have been like, well, you could have done this.
Yeah.
And it might not have been, well, you could have done this. Like, duh, dummy. It could have been, well, you know, you could have tried this. And, you know, that sort of thing. So I think this a toughie.
Yeah. In this particular instance, right? So let's say it had said puppy death, you know, that's not comfortable. And I would have been concerned, and I would definitely ask questions if their username was puppy death or something. Like, I can't believe that just came to my mind, but that would be a really weird username. I'd be like, what are you? You know, why? But in this case, I had protectiveness, like Nicole had said, about the fellow community within the virtual spaces. And I realized, like, there's very few people I know in these kinds of spaces that are willing to do these soft confrontations that are not about, like, if you don't change your username right now, you know, I'm going to report you to the world and dox you and whatever. I'm just giving him an abrasive of sorts response that's very compassionate and present and grounded. And if he gets one or two of those, he will go change his username. And I'm guessing he will do that from that interaction. And I also feel pain with him because that was something he was proud of. He liked that username for a game he used to play. I just know that that's not the impression he's going to give off to most people. And that is its own kind of harm in the era we're in. So I would say I actually just wrote something the other day preparing for this that we're going to be releasing on vortexr.org. And it's about checking your nonverbal communication. So this should be released in the next couple of days. It's going through different ways to check for that. One of the exercises I invite you to do is read what somebody has said that you're having a trigger response to, as in, like, you're activated, you have fear, you feel. So read what they've said, because I'm guessing most of you are doing online only communities. Read what they said out loud and feel the tone of your voice saying it when you read it out loud without trying to bias it or whatever. That will give you information on your biases. Then read it out loud as if this person is the closest person in your life that you deeply trust, and see how the tone changes. And then read it out loud as somebody you wish you will never hear their voice again.
That's fantastic.
And when you have that range, it starts to help you understand how the rest of the community might be responding to this, but also how you might overcompensate and read too much into it because you don't have those nonverbals. And so always assuming this person is being vulnerable, no matter who they are and what they're saying, there's a vulnerability in them putting something out. And they're trying to get their needs met. And there's some confusion happening in me as to what those needs are and how much we can meet them and how they can fit with us even better.
Love this. Taking some notes.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been thinking about too, that I wish I had maybe given more thought to, but what the heck. A lot of what community managers do is change management. And I think that conflict resiliency could be incredible as a tool for doing that, especially when you're dealing with a wide range of personalities who have a lot of pressure on them, limited resources, particularly in terms of time and attention, and different cultures as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So so I don't know. What comes to mind when you hear that? Because I'm always looking for things better.
Yeah, thank you. I look at this as a metaphor of like an hourglass. Community managers are that little bottleneck in the hourglass of like where the product or whatever the thing is that is being offered to the community is coming around them. And they're kind of mediating how that is released and giving feedback up above of like, hey, you're flooding people. Don't have these many updates. Hey, they really liked this thing and they hate this other thing. And representing a community voice to people who are busy and overwhelmed and probably have their own community traumas and are imagining whatever you're saying with an extra heap of antagonism or grumpiness. Like, oh, they're never going to be satisfied. That's what I hear people internal say all the time, that you can never please them. And so it's very hard to work with all these stakeholders that have different needs and interests and cultures. And yeah, I would say conflict resiliency is your key to not burning out in this work, because community managers are asked to do so much cultivating of human goodwill with so little time and resources and face-to-face time with decision makers and with community members. So here you're supposed to be having all these amazing feelings about this group that you've never even talked to face-to-face. And then you're supposed to be like channeling the best marketing, I don't know, hoopla of the product to a group of people that you know will be cranky about this and have difficulty absorbing it. And so conflict resilience is like, we're going to assume off the bat there will be conflict here. And this is part of the process. And it's also part of our health. And so what I like to do is add the word micro onto conflict. So put it at the beginning, micro conflicts. Micro conflicts are the sparks that can actually lead to collaborations, to creativity, to new connections. And there's serendipity in the guise of maybe something scary. And so, yeah. So micro conflicts are the opportunity to say, we have life. It's not just lurkers. We're having a moment. This is uncomfortable. This is awkward. This is hard. And how do we create rituals of connection to allow for these micro conflicts to exist, but also have meeting places for people to come together and talk it through and find other common ground? So there's a group on Discord for an AI art app, Midjourney, and they have office hours every week. And I know that's a common idea. I don't know how many communities do this. But when I listen to their office hours, what's really fascinating to me is how little people actually talk about the product itself. They talk about aliens and God and philosophy and, you know, like origin stories of the developers and whatever. But that human capital that's being built, that social exchange of like, I know you're a human being, I can see your opinions influencing the product, builds a lot of goodwill and amplifiers of this product. So I would say in general, my biggest thing is if you're noticing a lot of bias and fear happening in the community, The way to mitigate that is rituals of connection. Because rituals of connection calm our nervous system down. And they allow us to say, almost like picture it like a pack of wolves, you know? The wolves want to howl at the moon, but they don't do that immediately. They have to run together first. And that running together is that co-creation. It's that we're going to tackle a problem. We're going to group around a cause that this organization and that this community can agree on. And we're going to do something creative around this together. There's ways, if we can anticipate what that outreach is going to be, what the possibilities are, what the purpose is, we'll actually collaborate as we conflict and do uncomfortable things. It's amazing how uncomfortable people will get if they feel like there's purpose in it and they're going to grow through it. And the way to soften those biases is to confront those biases by being around people not like us. But if we're not around people not like us very often, they get pretty thick, those blind spots, you know? Only eagles. Those are the only predators that exist ever, ever. And everybody's an eagle. So diversify your predatorial repertoire. And you will be less freaked out by anything that looks like a bird.
This is really helpful. One thing I'm just thinking about in terms of change management and conflict resiliency is, I think the big shift for me as a result of this AMA is that I think when I go into these situations, I expect an outcome.
Yes, yes.
And I need to go into these conversations without outcome expectations whatsoever, right, beyond having a conversation.
Yes.
And doing, being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Dealing with my fear and my bias in it.
Yeah.
But just being present, yes, and not having any attachment as we learn in Buddhism to do that. And that is, for me, a very radical and incredible shift.
Yeah, it is. It's massive when I'm not trying to get us anywhere. It's anti everything I think I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm the fixer and I'm the hero and I'm the manager and I'm supposed to be strong arming us in a direction. But as my aunt, who taught me a bit about riding horses and is avid into horses, as she taught me a very long time ago, she said, Ruth, if you treat a horse like you have 5 minutes, it's going to take all day. If you treat a horse like you have all day, it will take 5 minutes. And I learned that the hard way in multiple ways throughout my life. So that hit me very deep, of just going, by visualizing where we aren't, we will never get there, or it will take a long time and we will both suffer. By being where we are and choosing to grow myself and be present and set the container. Maybe I only have 5 minutes, but actually saying that and then being radically present in those 5 minutes can be really a totally different feel to that uncomfortable conversation. Yeah. So thank you for getting that, Lori. It's, if you start looking at discomfort, like here's fear. Yeah. Discomfort. So comfort is, I like that word because it's like the castle, the comfort. I need the fort. I need the chrysalis. I need the protection. We all have to have comfort in our lives to not go crazy, to not lose our minds. Comfort is, I can now go to sleep and recover my body and come back out into the world. So comfort is good. Discomfort is also important. If we're in too much comfort, it becomes a tomb. It becomes a incredibly biased, like, vacuum. So discomfort is what's beyond comfort. And then trauma is even further beyond discomfort. And so figuring out where that line is for me, where my discomfort is going to start to unravel me and I'm going to get disoriented, is really important. Sometimes my discomfort margin is very thin. and I know that I need extra protection, and I need to call my other community management support people to kind of like soundboard off of them of going, okay, I'm going to read something out loud. Tell me how you feel. And then get their impressions to kind of work through any kind of bias that I got going on.
I wasn't sure if like you were just talking about like gauging your discomfort borders.
Yeah.
So I'm loving this. What's a good way to gauge our discomfort borders?
Yeah. So first, for me, it starts with noticing my body. So as I'm talking to you throughout this hour, what I'm enjoying what's happening is I'm actually sitting back more and more, and my shoulders are coming down. So I'm going, this is a good therapy for Ruth today. I'm actually becoming more in my strength through the discomfort of not knowing what we're going to talk about next.
That's curiosity.
That's curiosity. And it's also a sense of spark. I'm using the spark of that discomfort to find some of those treasures inside of me that I haven't, hi Juan, I haven't pulled out before. And so discomfort is, if I was really uncomfortable, and let's say, because I have not told any human beings, I told an AI last night that I was playing around with, but I have not told any human beings the story I told you today about the white weapon. And I was uncomfortable telling it. Not sure if you could tell. There's discomfort in the possibility that I really read this wrong, and I was the troll in this scenario. And so some of this was my vulnerability of saying, hey, I did a really hard thing, and it might have been a harmful thing. And it still might have. But I was giving an opportunity to hear some feedback where everyone felt like they were at if they had heard this. If I was hunched over and leaning in here and like listening and kind of like my eyes are getting a little droopy, that's telling me I'm outside of the discomfort and I'm going into kind of a disassociation or a trauma response. So I learn with my body where my discomfort is and where it turns into like an allergic reaction first. And then that translates to my relationships. So what I've noticed when I've coached and supported and also been in community management scenarios, a lot of the discomfort for community managers is just overwhelm of information and expectation of your OKRs or what's the other one? Yes, KPIs. So there's this constant sense of I haven't grown the community enough and I don't have the proof and I'm not doing a good enough job. That's a lot of discomfort. Like I'm already feeling my spine start to curl into a ball saying those things. You all have a very hard job, a job that is like more and more being given to AI and automatic processes. So your discomfort levels are probably pretty high. And how to ask yourself, what's in this still for me? How am I growing? How do I know that I'm learning and transforming and connecting in genuinely with these human beings that I'm caring for? How do I know when I've had too much? I know one community manager that said that after she did an update release every week, she had a planned walk with some of her coworkers to just walk it off, because she knew there were going to be all kinds of discomfort responses that she was going to have to respond to. So planning those cycles in for our bodies when we know it's going to be a hard moment is a way to mitigate that discomfort and stretch ourselves a little bit more.
For folks who aren't really somatically very aware, and there's a lot of, what are some other ways we can recognize our discomfort borders? Yeah.
So one way that I might check is how often am I using emojis in responding? Because those are kind of like my easy win ways to connect with community without having to compose a whole thing that could be quoted on the New York Times tomorrow. Writing things to people are tough more and more, right? But emojis, I mean, who's going to put, unless I'm putting really inappropriate emojis repeatedly, I don't see that happening. So if my emojis change though to more bland or neutral, like what is my like vulnerable emojis versus what are my safe emojis where I'm just like thumbs up. I'm not going to put any face because I don't want you to know my feelings. That's a way to check my overwhelm level. Another way is onomatopoeia. I don't think I ever say that word right. The sounds we make to convey emotions that we actually write into words that have no, dictionary meaning necessarily, like oof and oh and right? So when I'm having those come out in my language, that's a sign I'm practicing my vulnerability. And if I'm in a good discomfort range, vulnerability is part of that. If I'm in a trauma discomfort range, I'm going to be retracting and getting very concrete, very like black and white. I'm going to have periods on my sentences, probably no exclamation marks, correct capitalization. Those are all signs that I'm in a place of like, whoa, the eagle could get me at any moment, right? So that's not a learning space. That's a short-term coping space. And that means I need to be getting my self-care resources activated because I'm in a tough spot. But those are kind of ways outside of me in the written form that I can check myself for how activated and overwhelmed I am.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I really have loved this. We're almost at time. Does anyone have any more questions for Ruth before we hop over to our MS Teams space where folks can type questions there and have Ruth answer them?
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so glad.
This is making me think, and then we'll sign off, of this wonderful quote from David Bowie, who says, if you're feeling safe and comfortable, you're not in the right space. And he says to think about your discomfort as being in the ocean and you know the bottom's there, but you just can't feel it. You can almost slightly touch it. And he's like, that's when you're in the space to really make things happen.
That's interesting. And I would say somebody needs to create a quote around saying, we all need to sleep. This kind of woke culture thing, the war of woke culture. I think we're missing the point that there are moments where we need to be unconscious and it's healthy for us. How do we do that in a way that is least harmful, as in I'm not behind a wheel while I'm going unconscious, least harmful for the world around us, and can actually renew us to grow and be more distance between our toes and the bottom later. Right? So floating's okay, sleeping's okay. Just do it in a safe way so that you can swim like we're all swimming for the fun of it the next day. So much gratitude to each of you, and I'll keep my eye on Teams for how I can support.
Thank you, and we'll see you in Teams. And thank you, everybody, so much for your time. Yeah. And thank you so much, Ruth, for your amazing, amazing wisdom. And I'm feeling very I'm feeling quite empowered and interested in diving deep into my own discomfort.
Yeah, so, me too.
So thank you.
Let me know how that goes.
I will. Okay. See you soon.